What's executive functioning? Why is it important? And why do autistic people have difficulties with it? Let's chat. Hi, I'm Phil, a late diagnosed autistic older adult, and it's my goal to advocate for autistic adults by providing positive science-based information about autism and by sharing some of my own stories along the way. So first up, what is executive functioning and why is it important? Executive functioning is the cognitive processes that are essential for controlling behaviour, managing emotions, guiding decision-making, focusing attention, and controlling our actions. These are the actions and decisions that all people make on a daily basis or even a minute-to-minute basis to negotiate life. Some examples of executive functioning can include organisation, planning and prioritising, task initiation and task switching, working memory, emotional regulation, impulse control, maintaining attention, time management, flexibility in thinking and behaviour, problem solving, self-reflection and assessment, and response to and tolerance of stress. All these components of executive functioning help us to regulate our thoughts, actions and emotions to achieve our goals. And by goal here, we're referring to the immediate life goals like getting dressed or doing a task around the house or going out, etc. Okay, so that is a bit of a list. So let's break it down further and look at why autistic people may struggle with some of these things and what that might look like in practice. The first point to note is that executive functioning is primarily carried out in the brain's prefrontal cortex. Autistic people, and for that matter ADHD people as well, process a bit differently. The most common executive functioning challenge faced by autistic people is in the category of flexibility. This might look like difficulty transitioning between tasks, having difficulty with changes in routine, getting upset or dysregulated when expectations are not met. This might be when others don't do what they said they were going to do, but equally it could be when a task we engage in does not work out exactly as we had planned. This can start to look like perfectionism. All these things can lead to an autistic person becoming stuck. Other examples of executive functioning challenges in autism might include inhibition control, or not thinking through the consequences before doing something, overreacting to small problems, which is an example of emotional control challenges. A very common executive functioning challenge in autism is frequent inability to start tasks. This can be linked to challenges in problem solving and the inability to independently create ideas or responses. Again here, we are talking about the immediate actions required to initiate a task, as opposed to the ideas and creativity that autistic people may excel at in other areas of life. Problems with working memory might mean the autistic person has trouble with tasks that have several steps. Challenges with planning might also contribute to difficulties in starting tasks or not buying all the materials needed to start a task due to a missed planning cue, or starting the task and then having to stop because of issues that could have been foreseen with adequate prior planning. This can also extend to difficulty prioritising tasks and attempting to multitask. Uneven productivity or a lack of motivation may also be common experiences for autistic people. A lack of self-awareness can also be a key executive functioning challenge in autism, leading to a lack of self-monitoring or checking. This lack of personal awareness might mean we don't easily change our behaviour when those change cues might be obvious to others. It can also mean we don't check our work for mistakes. Time management can also be a challenge for autistic people. This might include difficulties in maintaining a schedule. And all of these challenges can contribute to the common autistic experience of difficulty in accepting or adapting to change. So when we talk about executive functioning challenges, that sounds a lot like ADHD and the common attributes you would expect from someone with ADHD, right? Well, yes, absolutely. And as we know, autistic people are highly likely to also have co-occurring ADHD. In fact, up to 70% of autistic people also experience ADHD. So, are we just talking about ADHD as a part of autism? Before jumping into that question, one point that seems relevant is that while there is research into how autism and ADHD interact within children, there seems to be less research into that same relationship within the adult autistic population. Another point to make here is that autism and ADHD are not just two separate conditions that may coexist in an individual. Both of these conditions are due to how our brains have developed differently to the neurotypical brain. There is not one part of the brain that causes autism and another part that causes ADHD, but rather it is how the whole brain develops differently that cause the characteristics of either autism or ADHD, or the combination of both together. This is where the term ADHD becomes significant, in that we can start to think of autism and ADHD not as the combination of two separate conditions, but rather a unique condition that happens to have a combination of both autistic and ADHD traits. But if we return to ADHD dominant executive functioning struggles, we tend to see things like difficulties with impulse control, which can manifest in inappropriate social behaviour, or acting without considering the consequences. As with autism, working memory difficulties and difficulty following multi-step instructions. Attention regulation and challenges and difficulty maintaining sustained focus on tasks. Challenges in initiating tasks that are not perceived as rewarding. As compared to autism, where starting a task might disrupt the current status quo or feel overwhelming or sensorially challenging. And time blindness is often characterised in ADHD. This is the difficulty in perceiving, estimating and managing time. This can create particular challenges when trying to meet deadlines. So both autism and ADHD have executive functioning challenges, with autism being dominated by cognitive inflexibility, hyperfocus on special interests, and rigid adherence to rules, where ADHD is more dominated by shifting focus too easily, difficulty in sustained attention, time blindness, and impulsivity. And as we have said, the majority of autistic people will also have ADHD, so this is where we see a combination of all these traits. So what are some of my typical executive functioning challenges? First up for me, starting any new task is really difficult. This might be when it comes to doing a building project around the house, where starting the project requires doing some demolition of what was there previously. For me, this is a huge obstacle, as I don't like change. So the change of knowing that what has always been there needs to be torn down is a huge barrier, even when I know the end result will be so much better. This can also be because once I start, I know I'll have to keep going, which I know will be difficult, as task completion is another key executive functioning struggle for me. Actually, a key challenge in this type of project for me is difficulty in planning it out and making decisions on how to proceed. Another more everyday example of task initiation struggles are doing these podcasts. I usually know what the podcast topic will be, but making a start on writing and researching the content is so difficult. And when I do start, if I get interrupted or even distracted, then I find it excruciatingly difficult to return to the task. An example of this happened today. I'd been putting off starting writing this podcast all week, so decided last night before bed to spend a half hour getting the bones of the topic down so I could get into it fresh this morning without feeling like I was starting. That worked great, and I was working well all morning and hyper-focused on the process. Fantastic. But then the internet went down around lunchtime and I lost that flow state. It's now almost 4 p.m. and all I've done since getting the internet back up and running after lunch is scroll YouTube shorts. I've only managed to get working on this again in the last half hour, knowing that I'll need to stop again as we need to go out soon to get dinner. So what about things like planning? Is that an issue for me? Well, yes and no. While I struggle or even resist the act of making plans, once I do start, my autistic need for certainty kicks in and I might then overplan, or at least spend more time planning than is warranted for the task. This might have the result of chewing up all my available bandwidth, which might then impact on executive functioning further by making it more likely I will miss important details in subsequent actions. Working memory is also a huge challenge. Like many autistic people, I also struggle with instructions that are either multi-step or just given verbally, where I subsequently may start the task and realise I have no idea what comes after the first few steps. Or equally just have an overload as someone is trying to explain something to me and not hear any of it. This can extend to conversations where I may zone out and lose the thread of the conversation, especially if the topic changes. Another key executive functioning challenge for me, which is common for people with ADHD, is getting distracted when undertaking a task and switching to the distraction, leaving the original task unfinished. This might be as simple as walking into a room to get something, but noticing something unrelated on the way, which could even be an unfinished task from earlier, and switching to that task instead of completing the reason I entered the room to start with. In fact, Tricia said for many years that if I do the dishes, I will always miss one dish that was prominently located. And yes, this is almost always true. Whether that is distraction or something else, it happens regularly to me. Working out a problem in my head can also cause me difficulty, as I can't keep each detail in focus for long enough to bring them together. Now, I don't know whether that is a working memory issue or has something to do with my lack of internal visual imagery or aphantasia. But I always find if I jot notes, I can solve problems easily where I couldn't just in my head. Emotional regulation can also be tricky. While many others would consider me a very level and calm person, that is not always my internal experience. I often find myself on the verge of a meltdown when things do not work out as I expect or plan, or if something I do does not work perfectly. A very common example here is what I would call my microdyspraxia, which is where I am seemingly clumsy doing small tasks with my hands, causing spills or breakages, or even causing injury to my hands, which often puts me on the verge of an emotional outburst. Now, I say microdyspraxia here as I'm someone who is often also very well coordinated at things like sport, but it's the day-to-day where I really struggle with this physical coordination. For example, yesterday I was taking 2 handfuls of unwashed dishes from the coffee table to the kitchen. Now, our house has a slightly sunken lounge area, so there are 2 steps down to the lounge. As I stepped up in this instance, I completely misjudged where the step was, sprawling headfirst onto the dining room floor with cups, glasses, plates and cutlery flying everywhere with a huge crash. Probably comical to watch, and surprisingly, despite the loud crash of plates and cups bouncing off each other, nothing broke as everything just bounced on the carpet. But one plate did bounce into my face as I followed it down, taking a tiny chip out of my front tooth. Now, ironically, this larger incident did not cause an emotional outburst, as opposed to how spilling my drink on the kitchen counter because my hand moved through the space unguided usually would. But I include that story of me sprawling with the dishes more as permission to have a bit of a laugh at my expense. Flexible thinking can also be a challenge. I am especially aware of this when I'm working doing shows. I have very set routines and ways that I operate. If a client wants me to do something that I have not prepared for, I can find that extremely dysregulating. But conversely, I am much more open to change plans than Trish typically is. So as with anything to do with autism, we need to be careful that we don't just assume that every stereotypical response or trait is experienced by all autistic people. As my experience shows, yes, I have clear areas where I am rigid and inflexible, but it's nuanced, and how it looks in me is not how it will look in the next autistic person. So why does it matter if our executive functioning is a bit skewed? Well, apart from the obvious, which is that executive functioning helps us start and achieve our daily or immediate goals, executive functioning is also a predictor of wider life outcomes. For example, working memory is key to learning outcomes like reading or maths. Impulse or inhibitory control might also be predictive of school completion rates, or of drug use or even abuse. But to be clear here, this does not mean that neurodivergent people are destined to be dropouts, druggies or abusers. It's the understanding of the challenges and appropriate support that can break this link to negative outcomes. Executive functioning challenges may also lead to outcomes like anxiety and depression. In particular, challenges with inhibitory control and inflexibility are highly associated with anxiety, and challenges with planning and organisation and working memory challenges being associated with depression. It has also been shown that greater difficulties with emotion regulation leads to a poorer quality of life due to impacts on social relationships. And again, emotional regulation challenges is likewise linked to depression. Now at this point, we need to talk briefly about autistic burnout. Autistic burnout is a state of intense physical, mental and emotional exhaustion, and often arises from prolonged effort to exist in a world that may not accommodate autistic needs, which may also lead to extensive masking. Burnout may also occur as the result of a particularly stressful event or period in the autistic person's life. It may even be that this burnout response is delayed from the actual time of the stressful event. Some of the signs of burnout might include extreme fatigue, withdrawal from social interactions, and a decline in our daily abilities. This decline might include reduced speech and a reduction in executive functioning skills. This decline in abilities may sometimes be referred to as autistic regression or autistic skills regression. And some autistic people report the feeling of not knowing if those skills will return, or during burnout feeling more disabled. In burnout, the autistic person may also have a reduced tolerance to external stimuli, both emotional and sensory, and meltdowns or shutdowns might become more common. Burnout might last for days, weeks, months, or even years. Now, burnout is definitely a topic best covered in its own podcast, so I'll leave this a very brief overview. But the important point for this discussion is the relationship between burnout and the reduction in executive functioning that accompanies it. So what are some things that can help an autistic person with executive functioning challenges? If given a task with multiple actions, steps or outcomes, it may help to provide that in writing rather than verbally to mitigate the challenges with working memory. Autistic people instinctively develop routines as a way of compensating for our executive functioning challenges. This shift from conscious decision making to automatic execution can reduce mental strain and anxiety. So understanding and supporting these routines can be helpful. As we have said, prioritisation can be a challenge, but focusing on prioritisation can actually reduce our mental load and help minimise procrastination. Taking this one step further, breaking down large tasks into chunks can help both with prioritisation and task initiation, as large tasks can feel overwhelming. And tools like calendars, lists, schedules and timers can be useful in organisation and time management. And finally, one key point to end on is that our executive functioning will be even more challenged and disrupted at times when we are physically, mentally, or emotionally drained or dysregulated. So it follows that taking care of those aspects of our life will be key in achieving our executive functioning goals. Things like getting enough sleep or quality sleep, regular exercise, getting fresh air, and in particular appropriate levels of sunlight. For some, that might include time in nature. Taking breaks, spending time on special interests, spending time with the people we want to be with in settings that don't overwhelm us, and then also having time alone to recharge, or spending time with pets or animals. And as we keep coming back to in these podcasts, part of the autistic experience is that we need support. So leaning into that support with people we trust to help us achieve these executive functioning goals can be key. Whether that's help with planning or prioritising, or making sure our routines are uninterrupted, basically it's working out what support is going to be the most valuable and communicating that with those supportive people. Our first instinct as autistic people is to do it alone, and I acknowledge that for some of us, that might be our only option as support is not readily available. But where there are safe, supportive people in our immediate world, that can be worth leaning into. Okay, so if you're autistic, what areas of executive functioning do you find particularly challenging? Let's chat about it in the comments section. If any of these podcasts might be useful to someone you know, please feel free to share this content widely. And as always, please like and subscribe for more thoughts and stories from an older autistic bloke. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.